with part 2 of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life version. And this week we are reading Deuteronomy chapter 13 to 24. And we just ended chapter 13 at the end of part 1. And we were talking about in chapter 13, B'nai Israel was given clear warnings against idolatry and idolatrous practice and being careful to not being led away, led astray by false prophets, false teachers, and to stay close to Adonai. And they were to remove all idols. And the penalty of idolatry is death. We talked about also how in the New Testament Yeshua addressed the church of Ephesus about returning to their first love. That was one thing that he had against them, that they forgot who their first love was, and that is God. God, our creator, who loved us before we were ever born. So that is really important. And Moses, in these last addresses, which Moses is actually, these are his last addresses to the people. He's making that very clear to the people so that they don't forget when they go into the promised land. They don't forget what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to not be intermingling among the heathen and getting turned away from Adonai. Chapter 14, we get into a recap, and actually we talked about kashrut and clean foods for holy people, and that's exactly what the first part of chapter 14 is. Clean foods for holy people. You are the children of Adonai. You are not to cut yourselves or shave your forehead for the dead, for you are a holy people to Adonai your God. From all the people on the faces of the earth, Adonai has chosen you to be his treasured people. You are not to eat any detestable things. These are the animals you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. Among the animals, you may eat any animal that splits the hoof completely split in two, and chews the cud. Yet of those that chew the cud or have a split hoof, you are not to eat the camel, the hare, and the rabbit, because they chew the cud but do not split the hoof. They are unclean to you. The pig, because it splits the hoof but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. You are not to eat their meat or touch their carcasses. Of all that are in the waters, these you may eat. Whatever has fins and scales you may eat, but whatever does not have fins and scales you are not to eat. It is unclean to you. You may eat all clean birds, but these are the ones you are not to eat: the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the red kite, the black kite, and any bird of prey of that kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the owl, the seagull, a hawk of any kind, the little owl, the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, the Egyptian vulture, the cormorant, the stork, a heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. All winged insects are unclean to you. They are not to be eaten. You may eat any clean bird. You are not to eat anything that dies of itself. You are not to eat anything that dies of itself. You may give it to the outsider within your gates so that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. You are a holy people to Adonai your God. You are not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now there's a footnote here, and it's 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 15. And it says, what harmony does Messiah have with Belial, with worthless people, is what's thought to be what Belial meant, worthless people, or what part does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? So with that respect, God was actually setting his people aside from the people that were not worshiping him, that were worshiping false gods, and they had practices that were not holy, and God was trying to keep his people separated from that and keep them holy to him. So in the second part of chapter 14, we're going to be talking about the tithe and remembering the Levite. Now remember, as we were talking about the division of the land that was coming, um, actually the it was Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh already decided they were staying east of the Jordan, and Moses took it to God. God said, "Okay, but they must go. The men, the fighting men, must go with Benaiah Israel until all the tribes are settled, because there's going to be battles that have to be taken place to actually make sure that they're safe in the land, and then they can return back to the land that was they inherited." But the tribe of Levi, the Levi, the tribe of Levi was not inheriting any land. They were going to be placed in cities. They were in charge of worship, so they were taking care of all the elements of worship, the tabernacle. They were the priests, and they were set apart to do this. So when Benaiah Israel was to tithe, the tithe was to go to take care of the tribe of Levi, the Levites. So this is what we're talking about in the second part of chapter 14. Tithe and remember the Levite. You will surely set aside a tenth of all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. You are to eat the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock before Adonai your God, in the place he chooses to make his name dwell, so that you may learn to fear Adonai your God always. Now suppose the way is too long for you cannot carry the tithe, because the place Adonai your God chooses to set his name is too far from you. When Adonai your God blesses you, then you are to exchange the tithe for silver. Bind up the silver in your hand and go to the place that Adonai your God chooses. You may spend the money for whatever your soul desires: cattle, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever your soul asks of you. Then you will eat there before Adonai your God and rejoice, you and your household. But you are not to neglect the Levite within your gates, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. At the end of every 3 years you are to bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year and store it within your gates. Then the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, along with the outsider, the orphan, and the widow within your gates, will come and eat and be satisfied, so that Adonai your God may bless you in all the work of your hand that you do. And that's the end of chapter 14. So to recap, chapter 14, it addresses Benaiah Israel are God's children, and they are to be holy. They were chosen by God, and God is holy. And in the second part of the chapter is clean and unclean foods that were recapped. And in the third part is the laws and tithes are reviewed. Chapter 15, Shemitah, cancellation of debts. At the end of 7 years, you are to cancel debts. This is how you are to cancel debts. Every creditor is to release what he has loaned to his neighbor. He must not force his neighbor or his brother to repay, for Adonai's debt cancellation has been proclaimed. Imagine how that will go over with the banking system today. Probably wouldn't go over at all. A foreigner you may force, but your hand is to release whatever your brother owes you. However, there should be no poor among you, for Adonai will surely bless you in the land Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess. If only you would carefully listen to the voice of Adonai your God, being careful to do all that these mitzvah that I am commanding you today, for Adonai your God will bless you as he promised you. So you will lend to many nations, but not borrow. He did not want his people to be in debt to other nations. You will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. If there is a poor man among you, any of your brothers within any of your gates, in the land that Adonai your God is giving you, you are not to harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. Rather, you must surely open your hand to him, and you must surely lend him enough for his need, whatever he is lacking. Watch yourself, so there is no unworthy thing in your heart, saying, the seventh year, the year of canceling debts, is near, and your eye is evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may call out to Adonai against you, and it will be a sin upon you. You must surely give to him, and your heart is not to be grieved when you give it to him. For because of this thing, Adonai your God will bless you in all your work and in every undertaking of your hand. For there will never cease to be poor people in the land. Therefore I am commanding you, saying, you must surely open your hand to your brother, to your needy and poor in your land. If your fellow Hebrew, a man or woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, then in the seventh year you are to set him free. And when you set him free, you are not to send him away empty-handed. You are to surely provide for him from your flock and threshing floor and winepress. As Adonai your God has blessed you, you are to give to him. You will remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God redeemed you. Therefore I am commanding you this thing today. Now if he tells you, I will not go away from you, because he loves you and your household, since he is well off with you, then you are to take an awl and put it through his ear to the door, and he will be your servant forever. And to your female slave you are to do the same. It should not seem hard to you when you set him free from you, for he has served you 6 years, double the value of a hired worker. So Adonai your God will bless you in all that you do. All the firstborn males that are born in your herd and your flock, you are to consecrate to Adonai. You are to do no work with the firstborn of your herd, or shear the firstborn of your flock. You are to eat it before Adonai your God year after year in the place Adonai chooses, you and your household. But if it has any blemish, if it is lame or blind, or has any serious blemish, you are not to sacrifice it to Adonai your God. You are to eat it within your gates, the unclean and the clean together, just as they eat the gazelle or deer. Only its blood you are not to eat. You must pour it out on the ground like water. And that's the end of chapter 15. So, recapping chapter 15, this is dealing with the Sabbath years and release. The Sabbath years of release are addressed, and there is a release every 7 years known as the Shemitah. In the second part of the chapter, it talks about the Hebrew slaves to be freed, and every 50th year there's a jubilee, and the last part of this chapter discusses offerings and firstlings. So chapter 16 begins with the 3 harvest festivals, and then we're going to get into the next parashat, which is Parashat Shoftim, where judges are appointed. So we're going to do the first part of chapter 16, 3 harvest festivals. Observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover to Adonai your God, for in the month of Aviv, Adonai your God brought you out from Egypt by night. You are to sacrifice the Passover offering to Adonai your God from the flock and the herd in the place Adonai chooses to make his name dwell. You are not to eat hametz with it. That's leaven. For 7 days you are to eat matzah with it, the bread of affliction, for you came out from the land of Egypt in haste. And this is the unleavened bread that is to be eaten for 7 days. Do this so that all the days of your life you will remember the days when you came out from the land of Egypt. No hametz, leaven, should be seen with you in all of your territory for 7 days, and none of the meat you sacrifice on the evening of the first day may be left overnight until morning. You may not sacrifice the Passover offering within any of your gates that Adonai your God is giving you. Rather, at the place Adonai your God chooses to make his name dwell, there you will sacrifice the Passover offering. In the evening at sunset, the time of your coming out from Egypt. You are to cook and eat it at the place Adonai your God chooses. Then you will turn around in the morning and journey home. For 6 days you are to eat matzah. On the seventh day there is to be a solemn gathering for Adonai your God. On it you are to do no work. 7 days you are to count for yourselves from the time you begin to put the sickle. I'm sorry, 7 weeks. This is the counting of the Omer. 7 weeks you are to count for yourself. From the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain, you will begin to count 7 weeks. Then you will keep the feast of Shavuot, that's Pentecost, to Adonai your God with a measure of a freewill offering from your hand, which you are to give according to how Adonai your God blesses you. So you will rejoice before Adonai your God in the place Adonai your God chooses to make his name dwell. You, your son and daughter, slave and maid, Levite and outsider, orphan and widow in your midst. You will remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you are to take care and do these statutes. You're to keep the feast of Sukkot. And we talked about that. This was one of the fall feasts, also known as tabernacles, for 7 days after gathering in the produce from your threshing floor and winepress. So you will rejoice in your feast, you, your son, daughter, slave and maid, Levite and outsider, orphan and widow within your gates. 7 days you will feast to Adonai, your God, in the place he chooses, because Adonai, your God, will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hand, and you will be completely filled with joy. 3 times a year, all your males are to appear before Adonai, your God, in the place he chooses, at the feasts of Matzah, which is unleavened bread, the feast of Shavuot, and the feast of Sukkot. No one should appear before Adonai empty-handed, the gift of each man's hand according to the blessing Adonai has given you. Now, the second part of chapter 16 begins another parashat, Parashat Shoftim, judges appointed. Judges and officers you are to appoint within all your gates that Adonai your God is giving you according to your tribes, and they are to judge the people with righteous judgment. You are not to twist justice. You must not show partiality or take a bribe. He's actually setting, this is what we hope our judges would be like today, that they were honest and forthright, the way Adonai is spelling out right here and now in this chapter. You are not to twist justice. You must not show partiality or take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and distorts the words of the righteous. Justice, justice you must pursue, so that you may live and possess the land that Adonai your God is giving you. You are not to plant for yourself an Asherah pole of any kind of wood beside the altar of Adonai your God that you make for yourself. Nor are you to set up a pillar for yourself. Adonai, your God, hates this. Now, this is the things that the heathen nations did, because this is how they worship their false gods and idols. So, an Ashtoreth pole is a kind of like a tree or a pole that was known as a sacred tree or pole that stood near a Canaanite religious location to honor a goddess, a false god. So it was sacred to them, not to Adonai's people, not to Bnei Israel, and he did not want them partaking in any of that. So in recapping chapter 16, we're dealing with the 3 harvest festivals and judges being appointed, and exactly how he wanted the judges to be. And also, he again recapped on not wanting Bnei Israel to be worshiping false gods and erecting pillars and for themselves, and poles that the heathen nations did to worship their false gods. He wanted them to have no part in that. So I'm going to end here and come back with part 3.